Have you ever set foot in a flea market, garage sale, or similar used game vendor site and notice a game card that looks slightly off? Congratulations, you've just taken the first step into the seedy underbelly of classic gaming, the world of bootleg games. Though some of these unlicensed games are typically of poor quality in just about every aspect, there are some rare hidden gems that might just be worth a play for fans of classic gaming. In this video, we're going to examine 5 bootleg games that turned out to be pretty decent. And, to be clear, I am leaving fan-made ROM hacks off of this list. We are only examining bootleg games that were intended to be put on a cartridge and sold in second-hand shops. Let's take a look. Number 5. Angry Birds for the Sega Genesis. Earlier in this decade, Angry Birds was one of the most popular and endearing mobile games on the market, seeing multiple spin-off games and eventually a blockbuster movie release in 2016. An intrepid developer hailing from China, the mecca of bootleg game development, decided it would be worthwhile to port this massive hit to the Sega Genesis. The game actually turns out to be a pretty faithful representation of the original gameplay, so if for some reason you have a system with emulation limits up to 16-bit consoles, and you have an itch to shoot colored birds at pigs, you're in luck. There is also a port of this game for the Famicom, but that one is not quite as playable as the Genesis version. The 16-bit system is much more accommodating for the overall aesthetic and gameplay of Angry Birds, and does not have that ear-piercing soundtrack that is featured in the 8-bit counterpart. Number 4. Carp Fighter for the Famicom and Nintendo Entertainment System. This bootleg fighting game featuring Nintendo characters borrows inspiration from Street Fighter II and Super Mario Kart, and it may be the first fighting game that features Nintendo characters exclusively. There are a handful of misspellings and graphical mismatches, a customary feature for most bootleg games of the time, but what Carp Fighter lacks in polish, it makes up for in action-packed gameplay. It features your standard single-player arcade mode, but pressing a button on a second controller activates a 2-player versus mode, perfect for some local fighting action. If you've got an itch to play Super Smash Bros. But can't emulate any of the newer 64-bit systems, Carp Fighter is a charming retro alternative that predates all of the Super Smash Bros. Games. Some have called it the best counterfeit game ever, and though that may be up for debate, it's definitely worth a look for classic fighting game fans. Number 3. Super Mario World for the Famicom. This is one of the most preeminent examples of porting a newer game to an older console, as it manages to take most of the elements from the Super Nintendo launch title and translate them admirably into an 8-bit format. This bootleg game is also noteworthy because the developers were able to code the mountable Yoshi into this 8-bit cartridge, something Nintendo had apparently tried to do since the original Super Mario Bros. The game suffers from some physics issues, gameplay oddities, and player movement awkwardness, but otherwise it stays very true to Super Mario World gameplay, including the overworld map, exclusive items, and even some of the Super Nintendo sprites. If given a choice, I would probably still recommend playing the legitimate 16-bit version of this game, but it is interesting to look back and see how flexible the Famicom and Nintendo Entertainment System could be for skilled developers of the time. Number 2. Pokemon Yellow for the Famicom. Here is another excellent port of a newer game to a classic system, possibly of even higher quality than the previous entry on this list. Unlike many other Pokemon knockoff games, this game stays true to classic Pokemon gameplay and is polished enough that it could pass as a legitimate game to the untrained eye. Though the release date of this game is not known, it makes use of assets from Generation 3 games including Pokemon Fire Red, meaning it was likely made after 2004. The original game is in Mandarin Chinese, however, internet user Lugia2009 took it upon themselves to translate most of the text to English, so the Western audience can enjoy this bootleg masterpiece. It includes a lot of post-game content, new events, and some legendary Pokemon that were not present in Generation 1, making this a rare example of a bootleg game that surpasses its original in many aspects. Number 1. Somari for the Famicom and Nintendo Entertainment System. This game gets a lot of flack from those familiar with notable bootleg games, and it's probably well deserved, due to the subpar physics, the unnecessary difficulty, and, well, the bizarre, nightmare-inducing player character. Still, for what it is, Somari is a solid bootleg title that brings competent Sonic gameplay to Nintendo's 8-bit system, something that many children of the early 1990s would have loved to get their hands on. Somari manages to include a sizable portion of content from the original Sonic game, with various gameplay techniques borrowed from subsequent Sonic releases. It is also the basis for many other Sonic-related bootleg games of varying quality, featuring both original characters and other Sonic characters. Somari is not much more than a novelty these days, but back in the 90s, you would have been envied by the whole neighborhood if you got your hands on this cartridge. Thanks for taking the time to watch this, and I hope you guys found it interesting. I personally love gaming stories that involve little-known quirks and controversies, so expect more content like this in the future. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and take a second to subscribe to my channel. I'll see you all next time.